These are unprecedented times.
Without my cartridge resist. Oh, it's sorry.
Russia's President Putin has announced a military operation in Ukraine. The role of crypto is evolving faster than we ever could have imagined. As conflict rages on in Eastern Europe, is crypto being used to skirt financial sanctions? Will a call for new regulations on digital assets be heeded? And when traditional banking is cut off, is blockchain the solution? This is Crypto Rising, where smart conversations happen. Welcome, everyone. You're joining us live. Crypto, a trending topic in the corridors of power. Are digital assets a humanitarian lifeline or a sanctions loophole? And what role does it play in times of war and crisis? Hello, and a warm welcome to Crypto Rising, an event series where smart conversations happen. We give you access to newsmakers and industry leaders for in-depth analyses of crypto news and its underlying blockchain technology. And welcome to you, our viewers. You're joining us from all around the world, more than 58 countries, for our first Forkast Plus live event, The Crisis in Ukraine, War in the Age of Crypto. I'm Forkast Editor-in-Chief Angie Lau, and we have a phenomenal panel lined up for you today. Today, we are in conversation with Illia Polosukhin, co-founder of decentralized application platform Near Protocol, and arguably one of the most powerful names in blockchain today. Caroline Malcom, head of international policy at Chainalysis, and Caroline previously served as head of the Global Blockchain Policy Center at the OECD, where she worked with governments and heads of states on blockchain policy and initiatives. So let's jump right in and welcome to you both, Caroline and Illia. It is just such a pleasure to have both of you here, and it is an important issue that we kick off this series with. I mean, the technology of cryptocurrency, blockchain, proving to be far more versatile in a crisis than we could have ever imagined. Everything that we're witnessing right now is truly setting the stage for the future. And if we look at what happened, fiat currency or cold hard cash became limited, and we heard stories, banks were closed. Illia, this is a topic that we've discussed before, a topic near and dear to your heart, obviously. And why do you think that, people turn to crypto when traditional banking doesn't work?
Well, thanks, Angie, for inviting us. Pretty much crypto has two clear benefits in this case. One is it is externalized from any of the centralized systems which banking always is, and in time of crisis you have no idea and you're not able to kind of even define expectations on will this banking system work, right? I mean, the worst case scenario, especially when Kiev was actually being attacked, like all of those banks have a headquarters in Kiev. You had no idea, like as a person, you have no idea if that bank will exist tomorrow. And so what blockchain offers is pretty much an unstoppable kind of system, which then you can leverage for to saving yourself, to helping others, and to pretty much kind of transferring value and transmitting value. And I think that kind of goes into the second part, is the currencies available, right? When something like this happens, right, it also was super unclear if the hryvnia will hold its value, and being able to leverage USD valued or potentially even directly going to Bitcoin or some other valued assets to kind of hedge against and be able to have some value as economy potentially collapses is also important, just to save lives as well. And so I think those two reasons led to this.
What were the stories that you heard, the anecdotes of personal stories where crypto absolutely made the difference?
Well, so we're kind of a community of crypto founders, right? Started Unchained Fund, which actually I think worked with 5,000 volunteers, so people on the ground. And so this was funds collected across the world, right? Including Vitalik, very generously donated $2.5 million, and then distributed in kind of smaller buckets to people around this, right? This was people who were pretty much buying food and cooking it and distributing it to elderly people. This was buying the various, medicine like insulin, which is, in very short supply, people need it every day, and delivering it there. So kind of now it's continuously funding, for example, restaurants that are offering free food to people who've been displaced by the bombing. So kind of there's a number of efforts happening there and turning to this. But like at the end, it's this ability to move funds fast to kind of deliver them directly to people. And sometimes they needed to convert them to fiat to buy things in the local store. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes the other part was actually accepting. Like if we're talking about large bulk buys, actually in Europe, just the logistics of moving money, for example, if they're in Ukraine to buy something in Europe is broken, right? There's no good way to exchange back to euro and move it to the European bank and do this. So a lot of European suppliers actually started accepting USDT, for example, at some premium for and pretty much exchanging them themselves in a way. And so through that, allowing to really quickly to buy the supplies, buy the medicine, buy generators and stuff like this.
That's incredible. That's incredible. I mean, Caroline, I want to bring you in here because, for the past few years, you've really sat at the height of these conversations at OECD and speaking with heads of states and really interacting from a policy level, just what these thought leaders were thinking about how blockchain and how crypto integrated within their sovereign nations, their jurisdictions. Now, let's talk about it. If banks or governments freeze an account similar to what happened in Ukraine, Russia, or even Canada for that matter, are we going to see more applications of crypto from a groundswell experience rather than a government or policy approved movement? What do you think?
Thanks, Angie, and really appreciate the invitation to be here. I think a piece of important context to this discussion is that we know that both Russia and Ukraine are two countries which already have a very high level of grassroots cryptocurrency adoption. Chainalysis develops the Global Adoption Index for cryptocurrency, which really looks at that retail level of usage rather than, say, institutional investors. And what we know from our data shows that already Ukraine is 4th in the world and Russia was 18th in the world. And this is prior to the invasion in terms of grassroots cryptocurrency usage. So I think already we had two economies which were already very crypto literate, if you will. And I think what we're now seeing is that come to life. From a policy perspective, I think this, brings a lot of very interesting questions to determining how exactly, crypto is used. And what it really has done is shone a light on some of the very positive use cases of cryptocurrency and how it does remain as a lifeline for people in crisis situations.
That lifeline is so important. And Illia, you talked about Unchained, and really I believe it's more than 137 million US dollars worth of crypto donations really now flowing into the Ukraine. The Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, also launched a new fundraising platform called United 24. Does this change the face of the humanitarian effort when it comes to donations and crisis and conflict zones?
Yeah, so part of kind of Unchained Fund's mandate is not just obviously help Ukraine right now, but actually try to build a platform for future crises. Because, I mean, sadly, this continues to happen. And the things we've learned through kind of building this operation, which, by the way, went from like 0 to, first million in first day, like setting up everything, starting to accept donations in first day, to there's actually like over, I think, 50 people now working on this, like a month and a half in, or like 2 months in. And so there's like a set of things you learn, and a set of things that kind of being in crypto you believe in, like transparency, being able to have accountability every day that no other existing NGOs kind of that are formed within usual parameters are able to do, right? Like normally NGOs have a report every year, and they have a huge pretty much operational overhead. And so being able to build something that actually delivers help, has accountability, has visibility through social, has ability to operate at very low overhead is extremely valuable, and like ideally can be like in a way productized or templatized for everybody else to reuse in kind of when need arise.
Well, that's certainly one aspect of what we're seeing, the role of crypto, really establishing precedents and workflow, almost creating that seamless efficiency to deliver funds to the ground to help and aid. And then the other side of it, and Caroline, I want to ask you about this part. The West imposed sanctions on Russian banks and organizations as part of that response to Kremlin's invasion of Ukraine, which makes crypto a sought-after currency for the Russians. A lot of critics say when sanctions are imposed on a country, should crypto be part of the sanctioning toolkit? Should the average Russian be swept up in the sanctions net, as it were? And how would policymakers view this? How do you view this?
So, Angie, what we've seen so far in Russia is targeted sanctions rather than sanctions against the whole country like we have in Iran, for example. I think the game changer here has been that for the first time, moving beyond the US to countries, whether it be the EU, Japan, Australia, the UK, all have made very, very clear in this war that sanctions apply equally to cryptocurrencies as they apply to the traditional financial system. And that's really been a sort of a game changer in recognizing, number one, the possibility of using crypto for sanctions evasion, but most importantly, from the industry perspective, is making clear those obligations on people like crypto exchanges, brokers, custodians, that they also need to be screening for attempts to evade sanctions. And the great news is that we do, in fact, have tools available. Just like we have in the traditional financial system, we have systems that can be put in place, and exchanges have put those in place to ensure that crypto isn't used as a hidey hole for sanctions evasion.
Talk about some of those toolkits. At Chainalysis, obviously, a lot of analysis and data scraping and all the tools that you're also applying there. How transparent can we be about crypto, even though it is supposed to be pseudo-anonymous or even anonymous in some parts? Is that a misnomer even?
Look, I think one of the fantastic things, and Illia has touched a little bit on it, is the transparency that we have with blockchain-based systems. And what that means is that, unlike in traditional finance, we have a complete map of transactions on blockchains. And that means that even though it means, number one, that we can put tools in place, we can put alerts, for example, when the US OFAC puts sanctions on particular cryptocurrency wallets, for example, we are able to put alerts in place so that clients know when they're using our tools, that if they're interacting with a sanctioned entity. And that can be both a direct interaction, whether a sanctioned person is trying to send funds into a cryptocurrency exchange, or whether they're trying directly, or whether they're trying to actually obfuscate the origin of those funds, perhaps by moving it through a number of personal or unhosted wallets before they actually get to that point where they can cash out into fiat currency. So we do have those processes in place where an alert will go off as soon as that attempt is made. The second thing we have, though, is and I should say, we talk a lot about, crypto exchanges, those third-party service providers. What's been really exciting, I think, here is that, perhaps if we can think about a silver lining of the invasion, it has forced the industry to really level up. And we've seen, for example, Chainalysis has issued tools for the DeFi world as well, oracles and APIs that allows screening for sanctions evasion as well. And that's really important because we know, for example, DeFi is a very fast growing area. We have some information about, the level of illicit activity. We've seen, whether it be hacks or other forms of illicit activity using DeFi protocols. So making sure that DeFi as a subset of cryptocurrency isn't a haven for sanctions evasion is really important. And we do have those tools now.
So many tools, so many advancements, and this is exactly what Crypto Rising is all about. Hang on to those thoughts there. In audience, I want to remind you, this is very much for you. This is an interactive experience, an interactive live show, if you will. And so we welcome your questions. Many of you have already submitted questions and we will be fielding them. But again, this is a live interactive experience. So if you do have questions, please do share them with us. But coming up next, California Governor Gavin Newsom recently signed an executive order for promoting and regulating the crypto industry in the state. Gavin's plan aligns with US President Joe Biden's executive order seeking clarification and guidance on crypto. Experts say the tide is turning. So what does this all mean for the regulatory space? We're going to ask Illia and Caroline what they think when Crypto Rising returns after this short break.
If you don't understand the future, you'll never see your place in it. Introducing Forkast.Plus, covering all things blockchain, independent reporting, insights, and access from Asia to the world. We cut through the noise where technology, insights, and access meet, where smart conversations happen. Make friends with disruption. Forkast.Plus.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Promised it was the short break, but we hope it was a good one. It is an important conversation that you are joining us for, Crypto Rising. This is our first in a series of events for Forkast.Plus, and this is where smart conversations happen. And we are coming through with that promise with Illia Polosukhin and Caroline Malcom. Now, many emerging markets have welcomed cryptocurrency. If you take the example of Ukraine, it was already crypto friendly and ranked fourth for crypto adoption even before the invasion. But since the war, the country has further improved its infrastructure and passed crypto-friendly regulations. Now, recently, both the US and Britain announced they will regulate the nascent blockchain market. Now, has the crisis in Ukraine acted as a catalyst in putting crypto policy on the discussion table in the quarters of power? And why are leaders in developed countries with stronger currencies actually paying attention to crypto and making a conscious effort in trying to understand this space? Welcome back to our next part of the discussion where we talk about crypto policy and the future of regulations. Let's welcome back to my two panelists, Illia Polosukhin, co-founder of Near Protocol, and Caroline Malcom, head of international policy at Chainalysis. Okay, let's get to it. Why do you think, both to you, why do you think regulators are moving crypto from their bad books, so to speak, to their good books? And Caroline, I'll start with you.
Angie, we've definitely seen an acceleration of efforts in regards to policy relating to digital assets. Cryptocurrency had recently, I guess in the last 12 to 18 months, started to get a lot more attention from regulators. In my former role leading the Blockchain Policy Center at the OECD, it was a really interesting switch over the years from sort of 2018, when it was us really seeking out the interests of governments in this space, through to about 2020, 2021, where there was a lot more incoming interest in, what could be done about this space, what sort of frameworks needed to be put in place that struck that balance between actually having an innovative space that could be the future of shifting value in the same way that we shift information around the internet today, but also, how to have the right guardrails in place so that it doesn't become a place for illicit activity. We know from the data that, in fact, illicit activity accounts for less than 1%. In fact, just in 2021, 0.15% globally of activity on blockchains relating to cryptocurrency actually concerns illicit activity. However, the risk still remains, and that's why we have to be so vigilant. And that's why we've seen policymakers, particularly spurred on, I think, with the war by Russia in Ukraine, to actually move forward and bring some of those proposals they had on the table, particularly around money laundering, introducing that global international standard set by the Financial Action Task Force in 2019, but actually moving to the point of implementation. So that's no longer just something theoretical, but the clear obligations are in place for people working in the space relating to money laundering. There also, we've seen an acceleration of more generally obligations related to digital assets, whether that be new licensing regimes, new rules relating to market integrity, for example, that we see in the draft regulations that the European Union is currently considering. But there's no question that with the invasion of Ukraine, that those discussions have been moved forward dramatically.
It's, and there you have US President Joe Biden with their executive order. And this after years of really seemingly intransigence when it came to the regulatory space. What do you think has changed since the Ukraine crisis that's making the West turn their attention to blockchain? Illia, you're there on the ground right now. You're in Miami on a global tour, no doubt, as for Near Protocol. But, what are the shifts that you've personally seen in the conversations that you're watching and partaking in, where the West is now participating?
So I was actually in Crypto Bahamas conference a couple of weeks ago, and the kind of wide range of people who actually attended that, right? There was Tony Blair and Bill Clinton panel on crypto regulations. There was kind of lots of different stars and athletes participating, as well as traditional finance, as well as kind of some of the crypto finance builders. And so I would say just over past year and a half, as Caroline mentioned, the growth and adoption of the ecosystem has been kind of supercharged, and through that, a lot more kind of people attention, as well as maybe even understanding, has come to the space, right? And so with that, it's pretty obvious that there's more need in kind of more clear stance, because part of it is also, from a builder's perspective, not having a clear regulatory framework means we actually operating in kind of in unclear zone, which adds both risk as well as kind of leads to doing a bunch of things which we prefer not to, right? We actually just want to build and kind of ship the product and get people to use it. And so like all of that, like from my perspective, figuring out a clear strategy here for Western regulators is extremely important to promote the space and actually have a say in it, because at the end, it is a decentralized space. It is global first, right? Like Near community is in every country. There's like lots of presence across kind of, Asia, kind of both Eastern and Western Europe, America, Latin America, Africa. And so it's important to have, like, if West wants to have a say in this, right, that's the thing, they will not be able to control it, but they can have a say, but they need to actually figure out like set of regulations to pair with that. Otherwise, places like Ukraine, which are passing these regulations, which are actually having a ton of great crypto developers and attracting them through, like before war started, there was a specific thing called DeFi that was formed to attract technology startups to Ukraine. would become bigger and bigger kind of players in the space, in a way also, you know, projecting sounds to the space as well. So I think part of it is seeing how this thing can be used. Part of it is like, as they were exercising sounds censorship, like, you know, as Swift system was exercising sounds of censorship, realizing that blockchain like is more governed by community versus, and by all those entities, by all those partners and ecosystem, versus by a single, you know, kind of mandate. And at the same time, realizing that like this space has grown so much that like they need to be participating, otherwise kind of will be left out.
Now, many in our audience come from the C-suite and are policymakers themselves. Caroline, let's share some advice on how to think about it. I mean, Illia makes a fantastic point that there is such a groundswell movement that you cannot ignore it. It's not even hard to ignore. It's close to being impossible to ignore. Now, Caroline, you've worked with governments, policymakers, in helping them understand blockchain, its applications, policy implications. What's your advice now? The shift, the tide has turned. So for those in the C-suite, from the FTSE all the way to Wall Street and everywhere in between, what should leadership from both a corporate and a government level be thinking about engaging when it comes to how to engage?
Angie, I think one of the things that the crisis has forced is a much deeper understanding of the technology and its applications. And I'd love to see that continue first and foremost. So this idea between the difference between, is it anonymous or is it pseudonymous, and why is that important? So helping people really understand some of those nuances of the technology. What does it actually mean to be a decentralized platform? What does it mean, the sort of, personal wallets, which are controlled by individuals who want to have that sovereignty, that control over their own funds, versus centralized wallets held by exchanges or custodians and held by third parties. Those serve different purposes, but there's not one that's necessarily bad and one that's necessarily good. And helping people understand the differences between those, I think, is really, really important. Secondly, to help them get a better understanding of the data. Because of the nature of the blockchain system, you can take a huge amount of, crypto ledger wide information about trends in this space. And that can really help you identify both where the risks are, whether that be in terms of illicit activity, where is ransomware actually, coming from, where are those funds being sent back to, how are illicit funds transferred, do they move through mixers, for example, do they move through OTC brokers, do they move to centralized exchanges? So starting to understand helps prioritize, both from a government law enforcement perspective, where those attention needs to go, and secondly helps understand from the opportunities in terms of where more interest could actually be given in terms of actually growing this sector. So I think those two issues are really key. And I think perhaps the third one, and to keep in mind, so much when we talk about this space focuses on illicit activity, negative. In Ukraine, just as we had in Afghanistan beforehand, is that we have seen some of the very positive use cases that come out of this space. And if we simply place the old rules on top of this new system, we're going to engender the same sorts of problems in terms of debanking for people who don't have access to financial systems, to cutting off access to things like the donations that we've seen in Ukraine. We have information. If we think about this question of, when do you apply the travel rule in terms of, actually putting KYC obligations on particular transactions, for example. We have the data to know, the average donation size into Ukraine, for example, and we have the data which shows the average transaction size into terrorism financing. And I'd really love to see policymakers draw on that information to have sensible and proportionate regulation in place.
That is such a great point that, because we've seen this from policymakers, slapping on, if you will, imposing or superimposing an old world system on top of new technology and new synapses, and there is not a natural fit, and there is inherently a very adversarial kind of relationship, and to your point, understanding that there are technology tools rather than enforcement as a tool. Illia, you're in it, you're thick in the weeds. This is Near Protocol, one of many, and how much are policy makers, number one, engaging with you, but number two, if you can engage right now and say, these are the things that we need when it comes to crypto regulations, what would that be? How would you like to see this relationship defined?
So I'm kind of a product person who is looking at this from kind of first principles. And first principles are, we do not want to fund terrorism. We do want to protect consumer and user. We do want to protect investors. We want to protect kind of the integrity of this whole system. At the same time, as Caroline mentioned, we have people who are unbanked. We have people who don't have IDs. We have people who are not able to kind of access regular banking system, and they will not be able to pass KYC in some cases, right? And we have technology now to actually deliver value to them and deliver ways for them to transact and interact. And so, kind of from my perspective as a space, right, we can come up with a set of rules, with a set of self-regulatory framework that is working from first principles, right? That is integrating, for example, Chainalysis and other analytics and information for sanctioned address, for kind of potential illicit activity directly into products, into wallets, into protocols. It is having a on-chain registries of audits of entities that are whitelisted, that are validated, that have passed some form of kind of information passing, that now users are able to know that they're interacting with something that has been audited, that has been, for example, classified properly, etc. And so I look at it as right now regulators trying to work each one in their own country, in their own, and I know that there's kind of global efforts as well, but they're not using the technology. They should be using the blockchain itself as a mean to actually structure this process. And so as we're doing this, there's now tools like DAOs, like registries that can be used to actually keep track of all of this kind of projects and what's happening with them in their life, through their life cycle, and be able to, for example, have a DAO that manages the registration of, for example, a smart contract. And if it needs to be updated, it needs to go through the process of re-reviewing. And then now that this registry has this contract, it can be pretty much have a stamp of approval that's shown in the wallets, right? So kind of having this set of rules that are not just rules on a paper, but actually, set of smart contracts, registries, etc., will allow us to move forward, will allow us to use the tools we build and actually protect users, protect consumer at the end from being rug pulled, from being scammed, from being attacked, and kind of integrating the anti-terrorism, money laundering kind of machinery will allow us to protect against that as well.
But that really underlines and affirms what Caroline, you said, which is governments and policymakers actually need to know the technology. These are the tools that are also available. Smart contracts can be embedded with policy, and working with product persons and developers like Illia, acting on first principles. There's a lot of synergy rather than misunderstanding. So let's talk about next crypto exchanges and their role in this crisis. I think a lot of focus has been put here. We know that cryptocurrencies promise the democratization of access to capital, which really leaves service providers such as crypto exchanges in the middle of a dilemma. Exchanges are trying to get regulated and licensed for institutional and mainstream push. We saw that at Crypto Bahamas, Illia, as you've said, and we've seen this around the world. But how can crypto service providers stay true to the core values of crypto and blockchain while abiding by international regulations and sanctions?
Yeah, look, I think from my perspective, there isn't a contradiction. We have decided as a society that there are certain exceptions to our freedom. And, money laundering, terrorism is one which we have agreed is a very important issue to tackle. And so the idea, and leading exchanges have been very, very clear about this. They will apply the sanctions and they will apply them aggressively to ensure that cryptocurrency isn't used as a means to avoid the sanctions that have been put in place. No government has called for an all-out ban on, providing services to Russia. There is so many broader considerations that would need to go into a decision like that to end up in a situation where you have an all-country ban all-country sanction like we have in Iran. And at this stage, that the balance that politicians and policymakers have struck is to say, let's focus on key targets in these economies, both in terms of individuals and institutions, particular government agencies like the central bank or particular private commercial banks. And let's focus on sanctioning those entities while keeping open the system for everyday Russians looking to move their funds and have that basic access to financial services. And I think crypto has fallen in line with that. And I don't see a contradiction between, the kind of the values and the vision for cryptocurrencies and their compliance with those rules.
Yeah, I think
Illia, I know this is also a, go ahead, Illia.
From my side is the kind of generally crypto, similarly as, having stacks of cash, similarly, as stacks of gold, like it's just a means of transporting value, right? And the kind of, there's always, two sides of the transaction. And obviously with DeFi, there's a little bit different machinery involved there, but like most of the kind of money, most of the value transmission is happening through the peer-to-peer transaction. And so because of this, there is another party that is being involved in this, and that party is the one who's deciding if they want to have this transaction with, with Russian government or with people in Russia. And so from kind of being a Ukrainian, the way I think Ukraine right now sees this is that anybody who is paying taxes in Russia should be sanctioned, right? Because this is directly kind of funding the Russian army. And so from this perspective, I mean, this is why it's really great to see a lot of companies kind of withdrawing from it, withdrawing from doing operations. But obviously banning everyone who is Russian, who has a Russian passport does not make sense because A, lots of people left, B, kind of people who need to leave, for them, crypto is also potentially a way to actually go out. And so, yeah, I think generally kind of figuring out how we can work, how we can get community to align right around this fact that like, hey, if this entity is paying taxes in Russia, then like by pretty much doing transactions with them, you are actually facilitating, you're actually helping Russia to attack Ukraine, then have this community consensus, right? So in a way, blockchain is not just uncensorable. It's all about the consensus of the community of the people involved. And so if everyone decides to not do something, right, then it not happening. Like the benefit here is not just like one party deciding; it's everyone needs to decide kind of in a common alignment. And so we see here kind of this common alignment been happening over past 2 months. That this is the right way, is not to deal with the Russian government. And so by doing that, people withdrawing, people kind of moving people, like companies moving people out, as well as figuring out how to potentially help people Russian people, who want to leave to settle somewhere else.
Illia, I know it's also a personal dilemma for you. You're Ukrainian. Many of your team are Ukrainian and Russian. This is an international team. How do you navigate this right now? This is such a personal conflict for you, and yet, from a 10,000-foot view, this is also setting precedents for how we respond in future. How do you balance that?
So to be clear, this conflict is not new. To be clear, Russia has attacked Ukraine in 2014, and this has been an ongoing issue. And so from this perspective, there's a very big difference between being Russian and Russian government, right? And so even for me, so I'm from eastern part of Ukraine, which is right on the border with Russia. And I do have probably half of my family is one way or another Russian. And so that's why I did always kind of align myself as broader Russian speaking community as well as with Ukrainians. But that doesn't mean that Russian government, Russian Federation, Russian country, it has anything to do with that, right? And so being completely disagreeing with what they're doing and how they're approaching it. And so I think that's similar with you have a lot of Asian Americans who are in US, for example, who may or may not support different sides of the what's going on in Asia, right? Again, there's a lot of countries, there's a lot of politics, but they still all align with they're all Americans. And so this is kind of generally what we see is that, and then in our case, all of our team has left, who was residing in Russia has left. The kind of people who are, sane in Russia are not agreeing with the government, are not aligned. There's not much they can do. There's it is a totalitarian state. It is very much if you protest, you will get arrested and potentially go to jail for a long time. And so the only option that they are left with is to leave and to actually build a life somewhere else. And this is why banning anyone who has a Russian passport doesn't make sense, because there's tons and tons of people kind of outside who are actually working to support Ukraine, who are working on building cellular technologies, who are working on humanitarian aid, and at the same time there are still people in Russia who are don't have means to get out right now. But again, distinguishing that and people who are directly contributing to pretty much Russian Federation, right? That those are the people who who are in a way an enemy here.
There's a clear distinction between the humanness of all of us, regardless of our passports, our ethnicities, our race, and our nationalities, and then what's going on where everyone is kind of all caught up in the mix. And then right in between is crypto and blockchain, a very powerful technology that is shifting the power and giving people an ability to address something so individually powerful and to protect themselves and their families. Thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And audience, again, this conversation is for you. So when we come back after a very quick break, I'm going to give us all 2 minutes. Go gather your thoughts. You heard a lot of great points from our panelists today. When we come back, you get a chance to ask Illia and Caroline your questions when Crypto Rising returns in 2 minutes.
If you don't understand the future, you'll never see your place in it. Introducing Forkast.Plus, covering all things blockchain, independent reporting, insights, and access from Asia to the world. We cut through the noise where technology, insights, and access meet, where smart conversations happen. Make friends with disruption. Forkast.Plus.
Welcome back to Crypto Rising. This is our first in our series at Forkast.Plus, and you are watching us live, more than 58 countries and viewers from around the world joining us. We are streaming not only on Forkast, but across many, many platforms. So welcome wherever you are joining us. It's great to have you with us. And we have a comment from the audience, and this is something that a lot of people are wondering about. If it can be sanctioned, it's not crypto. Illia, your thoughts?
So that is what's the definition of sanctions, right? If we're talking about a single person, single entity saying like, hey, we should ban this, that indeed is not decentralized. And so this is why I was mentioning, like, when it is a broad community, right, broad adoption, entities like exchanges, entities like potentially even DeFi starting to adopt these rules in one way or another, like independently of what they are, potentially validators, miners, etc. This is where kind of you have the consensus of the ecosystem to do something. And this can be, blocking some addresses. This can be, changing some rules, whatever that is. And so from this perspective, like, withdrawing from Russia and not doing business with Russia is one of such, decisions that kind of community started to make in crypto broadly. And I think that itself is the example how we should be doing this, right? Instead of a, single kind of handed ban of a country, of a people, etc., is you have this like actual community movement, like one by one, independent decisions, obviously talking to each other, obviously figuring out what's the right way to do this, doing this. At the same time, I mean, exchanges and companies are actually under specific jurisdictions. They actually need to comply with those jurisdictions. So from that perspective, if we're talking about an exchange operating in US or UK, they are legal entity of that country and they need to follow the rules of that country, of that decision maker at the top. So I would say like the crypto itself, is operating. There's nothing that can affect it from a single point of view, but if the whole consensus of the network decides on something, that is the new rules, right? And so that's why it's important to have such a diverse group participating in it. That's why it's important to have, global presence on blockchains, because we want everyone to be kind of active participants in making decisions.
Caroline, this question for you, and also Illia, if you want to jump in. Question from the audience: is there evidence of the Russian government benefiting from crypto at scale? Chainalysis, you're seeing the transparency of the data. So, but what is there evidence of the Russian government benefiting from crypto at scale? What is the Russians' official or unofficial stance here, as you see it? Caroline?
It's interesting, Angie, because just as we've seen other countries really move forward in terms of their position from a policy perspective on digital assets, we've seen exactly the same thing in Russia. For the last couple of years, there's been a very strong debate in Russia going back, if we were to generalize, to say the sort of central bank on one side, the finance ministry and other agencies of government on the other side, in terms of whether to allow cryptocurrency to, ecosystem to take hold and really flourish in Russia by having a system of rules and regulations that can provide some guidance on whether they're allowed to be used or not, or whether they should just suffer an outright ban, which has been the position of the Russian central bank for a very long time. Just at the start of 2022, though, we began to see a bit of a shift, and really a kind of a whole of government view emerging, very top down, to sort of say, no, we should have a regime in place which doesn't ban cryptocurrency, but which allows it in certain ways, in certain circumstances, to actually take hold. And that process was just beginning when the invasion of Ukraine actually got underway. So we definitely have seen a shift from the Russian government. But this question, and I think it comes up, are we going to sort of see, with Russia cut off from so much of the traditional financial system, are we going to see the Russian government move sort of their economy online into the crypto world? And I think there's really two key reasons that's very unlikely to happen. One is that transparency point again. This is not a space where you can move large sums of value, or indeed small sums, without that actually being traceable. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, is this question of liquidity. Russia, of course, is one of the largest economies in the world. To actually move the Russian economy onto sort of cryptocurrency, we're talking a level of liquidity that we just don't see in the markets today. Obviously, you know, market capitalization of the whole cryptocurrency market does fluctuate. It's particularly fluctuating right now, as we're also seeing in traditional stock market as well. But if we think about it sitting at around that $2 trillion mark, it's simply not enough to absorb the levels of funds that you would need to actually move the sort of Russian government economy, on a controlled economy, into cryptocurrencies.
Another question from the audience. We know that regulation is necessary for wider adoption of crypto. However, governments have been particularly skeptical of DeFi, decentralized finance, and are fumbling with how to bring them within the ambit of the law. How do you think decentralized platforms can be regulated without destroying the very essence of their decentralization? What can decentralized platforms do to make it easier to regulate them? How do we find the balance? That's a really good question. Illia.
Indeed. So kind of, I mentioned some of this, but in a way, to regulate decentralized platforms and decentralized finance, we need decentralized regulations. That's really the simple answer. And so to do that, kind of everything from, you know, how the protocols are launched, right? If they follow a specific procedure, which, you know, involves audits, involves potentially kind of a on-chain registration with, you know, token classification, with specific set of requirements around it, and then this feeding as, you know, kind of becoming a standard for all the wallets, exchanges, etc., to adopt as well and to leverage. This is kind of a way to do that. And so to counteract that, right now, what regulators are trying to do is to apply 1934 rules, like of securities law and other laws around, like, how if this, like, some token is, you know, deemed a security, you need to actually send, for example, a pamphlet to all the holders of this token, right? We're talking about blockchain with, you know, whatever addresses, accounts. There's no way to physically do this, right? There's no thing about like a bank safe where all the stocks need to be like stored, which is by, you know, 1934 rules what it is. And so there's just kind of, we need new rules that are actually adaptable for crypto. Like, from perspective of, you know, protecting investors, protecting consumer, there's some, you know, information disclosures that potentially are needed, but they need to be adopted for this digital world. And so this is where kind of regulators either need to work with the industry a lot more, pretty much asking to build a self-regulatory framework, right? And more being the guards of it and kind of providing feedback on it, or, you know, they need to hire kind of their own blockchain teams pretty much to build some of this stuff. And so this is kind of from a security perspective, from building this for 1 billion users, we believe we need this anyway. So we're actually building a lot of this infrastructure already because we want to protect users. We want to protect against, you know, rug pulls and kind of scams that are happening in the space. And the only way to do that is to have some of this framework actually established and like pretty much forcing it from a user perspective, right? Like, users only use products that went through this versus, you know, forcing it from a regulatory perspective, because this space can be anonymous, because this space can be kind of driven by kind of individual teams, right? Like and you know, after a person builds this contract, they can launch it and leave, right? That's kind of the space is not, you know, you have a company that needs to operate for these things to work. No, you can launch it and, you know, go to the beach pretty much, and it's going to work, you know, forever potentially. And so we need better processes around this that actually are kind of accounting for all of those differences that are not true about kind of financial and traditional business operations.
Your answer is just reflective of where we are in this space, and you know, it's history in the making. All of these standards are being defined right now, and it's a democratic conversation, even one that we're having right here at Crypto Rising and Forkast Plus with Illia and Caroline, establishing future rules. I know we're almost out of time, but I have to ask this question. It's a great question. How much do you both see the Ukraine leading the world on crypto and blockchain technology as it is rebuilt when the war is finally over? And we hope that is sooner than later. But what's the role of Ukraine, and where are we right now in this moment of history where Ukraine can play a role? Caroline.
So I think there's a huge potential here. Firstly, to pick up on some of the things that Illia mentioned earlier, that what Ukraine has put in place, particularly around the sort of fundraising, the crowdfunding of support here, to have that as a model when unfortunately we may be in similar situations in the future, or even other humanitarian crises where we can call upon the example that Ukraine has set to actually use crypto as a source of good, as an opportunity to both allow people to move funds as they're forced to leave their countries, but also to continue to provide support to governments. The second thing, and perhaps picking up also on Illia's last answer around DeFi, I think there's some very interesting things that remain to be built in this space. And this question around RegTech in the DeFi space, I think is a very, very interesting one. The Ukraine crisis brought out some of those tools, and I mentioned already the free sanction screening tools that we released at Chainalysis, but I think there's a huge amount more, but that just gives a little taste of what is possible in terms of using the technology itself to actually achieve some of those policy objectives. And perhaps finally on that point, from a government perspective, I think I'm starting to hear more conversations, particularly around DeFi, about what alternative means of how you regulating this DeFi space, which is growing incredibly quickly, but doesn't have that central person that we're used to having from a legal perspective to actually place obligations on. I think some very interesting ideas around, for example, self-regulating organizations using things like smart contracts, as Illia has mentioned, could offer an alternative and a fitting process to actually achieve those same policy objectives. But it's definitely going to take creativity from policymakers with the involvement of the industry to get there.
Illia, has the technology trajectory of crypto now changed as a result of what's happened?
So I think it's a combination. So Ukraine was already not just on adoption, but also on the developer side, right? Ukraine is one of the biggest developer hubs in the world. And so you kind of have this interesting mix of, people seeing that it was, to be more specific, a lot of it was in services industry, right? Where there was clients in various countries who were employing these people to work. And so what happened is, and what's happening, sadly, is that some of these companies have pretty much internal rules that they cannot engage with the service providers that are located in a war zone. And so because of this, a lot of the existing service providers companies are having issues with with their clientele. But crypto has no such rules. Crypto space has no limits, and it's global first. And so a lot more, from what I see, folks are moving into building crypto, right? Becoming, entrepreneurs, building projects within their existing organizations in crypto because it's such an open market. And so the way I see this is Ukraine was already, one of the leading Web3 developers, on Web2 developers, but it's going to actually supercharge us because there will be a lot more developers coming who actually may have lost their job during this crisis. And so through that, and through adoption, and through a very positive regulatory stance that the government has, and then also the need to actually attract a lot of investment capital, I see Ukraine pretty much blooming through crypto very much in coming years.
This is about seeing the potential, and certainly we have seen an acceleration. And I want to thank you, Illia and Caroline, for thought-provoking analysis and insights and sharing personal anecdotes, and also from policy perspectives and experience. You've both really shared a much deeper perspective beyond the headlines, and that's exactly what Crypto Rising is all about. That's exactly what Forkast Plus is all about. We'll leave the headlines and the saber rattling to others. Here it is about smart conversations, and this was one indeed. So Illia, Caroline, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.